Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm joined on the podcast today by Christopher Gould, author of the new novel, The Boys and Girls of America. Christopher, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your novel, The Boys and Girls of America, how would you describe the novel?
Sure. So it's a college novel set in the 90s. It deals heavily with Gen X themes. My protagonist is a visiting writer in residence at an upscale university. As it happens, it's a school he applied to years ago but didn't get in. So he has this opportunity to come back and relive everything that he missed out on initially.
Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing the novel?
Yeah, I had the title in my head many years ago, way back when I was writing my first book, The George Stories, and I was sort of trying to come up with a new project. And I came across this article about Gen X from a writer by the name of Rich Cohen, and it was from Vanity Fair. And it's probably one of the best articles about Gen X I've ever come across. So that was really the impetus.
Well, you said that the novel is set in the 1990s. While that's not historical for some of us, I'm curious, what did you do to remind yourself of that decade? Did you make playlists? Did you go back and look at headlines and media?
Pretty much all those things. I've always been pretty heavily into the whole music scene, and I still am to this day. So there's a lot of pop culture music references throughout the book. Certainly old college photos and all those kinds of things. It all sort of factored in. I did a certain amount of research just to make sure certain time elements lined up, but it's a topic I've been interested in for a long time, so I felt pretty comfortable writing about it.
Sure. Well, can you tell us about your initial writing journey that led you to writing and getting your first novel published?
Yeah, so I didn't start writing fiction until my mid 20s. I wish I started earlier, but unfortunately, it wasn't even on my radar way back. So I started writing some short stories. I took a handful of creative writing classes, and I eventually had my first short story published in 2013 by a lit magazine, which ended up being a chapter in my first novel. So it took me roughly 10 years to get the first novel published. It was a pretty big process, but it was good nonetheless.
Well, you mentioned that you started writing short stories in your mid-20s. Can you remember what was the initial prompt that made you sit down and start writing that first short story?
For whatever reason, I got the writing bug and I felt compelled to write. Over a period of time, it became a larger and larger part of my life. I took some creative writing courses that certainly spurred me on. I had some good initial feedback. And before I knew it, I was devoting massive amounts of time to it.
That's great. Well, can you tell us about your writing process when you were working on your new novel, The Boys and Girls of America? Are you someone who has an idea for a novel and does a lot of outlining before writing, or do you have just kind of a general idea and then you dive into the narrative? How does that work for you?
I'm pretty spontaneous when it comes to writing. I know with Boys and Girls, I wanted to create this opening scene with kids moving into this campus. And it's filled with a lot of excitement, a lot of nervousness. You have parents who are proud. There's very high expectations. So I tried to incorporate a lot of those different kinds of energies into it initially. And after that opening chapter, I wasn't sure where it was going to go.
Well, given your experience with getting these two novels published, what writing advice would you offer for those who may be starting their own writing journey and writing their first stories or working on their first novel?
That's a good question. I think for me in my early years, I was just, I couldn't get out of my own way. There were times where I just couldn't finish a single story. So you certainly have to have that level of dedication. If you enjoy devoting all those hours, I would certainly recommend people keep at it. it's a trying process, but the more and more I got into it, the more I found it rewarding.
I'm curious, have you started working on another novel now?
I have the very beginnings of an opening chapter, but it's going to be a while.
Well, can you tell us what you enjoy reading and maybe some of the novels or nonfiction books that you've read recently that you enjoyed?
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned previously in other interviews, I'm pretty heavy into a lot of classic literature. When the Modern Library came out with the top 100 fiction novels, I sort of went through it year after year. So certainly, Salinger's played a huge role in terms of influences. Capote, Roth, um, James Thurber. So those are some of the more established writers. Newer writers, certainly David Foster Wallace, even somebody like Don DeLillo. I've gotten heavily into him of late. So the problem I have with reading fiction these days is it's almost like homework because I'm always trying to learn new things, new techniques. So I have sort of branched out of late into nonfiction just because it seems like pure enjoyment. So that's been a good thing as well.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your writing and your novels?
Yeah, so my website is authorchristophergould.com. So um, I post updates on there. My books are available, of course. If people want signed copies, they're available through that website as well. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking to Christopher Gould, author of the new novel, The Boys and Girls of America. As he explained, it's a novel of Gen X in the 1990s. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy. And Christopher, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Chapter 1, Arrival. Freshmen emerge from the shadows of high-performance station wagons, sport utility vehicles, minivans, and the like, the restival pleasures long behind them. Simon Pure Daughter's golden boyed sons stood erect and motionless, taking in the full array of ivy brick dormitories of East Campus. They stood before the quad like indiscernible life forms, yet nothing of the moment was false-hearted. Rather, each body, each face, each soul was partaking in a victory of human achievement, for they were the conquerors, the winners, the 15% who'd been accepted in what the Princeton Review called a highly competitive first-rate liberal arts college. Curbside parents milled about, scuffling their feet as they basked in the glory of accomplished parenthood. Their children stood clustered in little pools of disquiet, exchanging glances that were vague and unknowing. Some were bare-limbed with their shanks exposed, while others donned statement-making shirts and sweaters embossed with high-end logos. A boy looked up into the sunblast and blinked. A girl kneeled and adjusted a toe ring. Fathers stood in reflective poses, pointing near and far, as though trying to get their bearings straight. Mothers made visors of their hands, whispering last-minute advice either to themselves or their children. There were bags and totes slung over shoulders, shiny leathered suitcases on maiden trips. There were boxes of books, dictionaries, thesauruses, sheen white pairs of Keds. There were outdoorsy-looking granola types sporting hiking boots, adorned with hideous-colored socks scrunched down to ankle height. There were girls in sublime and arresting summer dresses, as though about to partake in a college girls' evening on the town. A cluster of boys tossed a lacrosse ball between them. Their faces were a mass of fine-boned features and sun-bleached hair, emitting great celebratory horse laughs and guffaws, as though they were already the best of friends. A girl in tortoiseshell glasses sat cross-legged on morning wet grass, engrossed in a school-issued campus map. Behind her, a pale-looking boy was in the midst of a coughing fit. Grandparents leaned on canes and walkers. A lost child in the romper looked skyward for help. There were T-shirts advertising elite Northeast boarding schools, raw-boned faces beset with acne. A girl in a spaghetti-strapped number stood on one foot, open-mouthed and dreaming. A father and son pitched forward and back as they muscled the black and white TV. To their right, a girl in a Kelly green halter top deadlifted a microwave. There were offshoots of conversation and undercurrents of laughter. There were high-waisted shorts and low-rise denims, grass-stained Tevas and Sperry topsiders, an unclaimed package of pantyhose. The crowd was now of a gatherable size, dignified voices laced with status and refinement, melded with the countrified. All summer long, Edson College had been an extraction, and now at long last it was here. It was as though everything that had come before was but meaningless and trifling. It showed most in the contours of freshman faces, and their wayward smiles and furrowed brows. Tiny little frissions of excitement, embedded and intoned with a drumbeat of near measureless expectation. Presently a fresh armada of vehicles arrived, and with no room to park curbside, settled on an adjacent lot. In seconds, parents exited cars and unloaded items as though they were perennial gift bearers. Rollerblades, skateboards, desk lamps, alarm clocks, the still and shopping bag junk food. Their progeny stood on the macadam and stretched, almost as though they were shaking free of the last remains of childhood. Recovered, they gazed across campus in dream state, in torpid speculation, as if with each blink of the eye they were waving goodbye to all things familial and wholesome. Freshmen in the summer lush crisscrossed the great sad lawns of Edson in search of new homes, new friends, new roommates. There would be no more SAT prep or AP courses. Gone too were the valedictory addresses, the graduation parties. Instead, there was the reliable, almost celebratory rattle-banging of suitcases bouncing off knees, the near-constant chatter of youthage, persiflage. There were girls both striking and eye-catching, boys gym fit with enviable summer tans. There were class clowns, slackers and nerds, sluts, hippies, posers, wannabes, jocks, debate team champions, prom kings and queens, presidential scholars, wallflowers, shoegazers, national science fair winners, first runner-ups, a dairy princess. It was, of course, a national pilgrimage, a scene almost exclusively and distinctly American, the hallowed grounds of a campus, overrun in a giant, perceptible youthquake.